Friends, very good morning to all of you. Good morning to on a Sunday. We thought there are a lot of important meetings lined up. So since we could not get the speakers date, we said let's not kind of see the day, but kind of have the meeting which will benefit the members. Today we have a topic which is more for the industry. There have been a lot of requests coming from members that we are having meetings for the practicing members, but less for industry members. We thought rightfully to have few in the series. And today we have CA Nagadurga Sudhakarji, who is the Director of Finance of Dr. Reddy Laboratories, who is joining from Hyderabad, who is going to take us through the accounting issues in pharmaceutical industry. And also joining with us, apart from C. Abhishek Murli, Secretary, is C. Naresh Chandra Gelli, who is also the chairman of the members in industry for SARC of ICA. In fact, in spite of the pandemic, we have did a lot of initiatives. The saga continues till the end. So before I request C. Abhishek Murli to formally introduce the speaker, let me request C. Naresh Chandra Gelli to share his thoughts with all the members. Gelli sir, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman of SARC, DC Jainji, then Secretary Abhishek, CA Nagadurga Sudhakar Garu, Speaker of the session for the day, and all the members who have registered for this webinar. Good morning to each one of you. Friends, pharmacy is one of the important business centers in Hyderabad. It's also called pharmacy capital of India. We have a lot of companies, and we are very fortunate to have a speaker who is from Hyderabad and who is a seasoned player in this line of industry. With a lot of members in industry, I look forward for a discussion or a debate or on issues relating to our profession. So, and I'm sure CA Nagadurga Sudhakar would definitely discuss and highlight the important issues which are affecting his specific domain of activity of pharmacy industry, and also probable solutions, what they are seeing and how the professionals would interact and overcome on that. One of the important issues in terms of the accounting issues could be with reference to the IFRS and India standards, which the government of India and of world economy would look forward for tie-ups with big companies like Dr. Reddy's and a lot of other companies in India. So I'm sure the speaker would enlighten us, and I would have a wonderful session. I thank Chairman for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gelli. In fact, we must add that Nagadurga ji has also been associated with a lot of our institute activities in the past, and we expect him to continue his services for the members in future also. Abhishek, over to you to introduce the speaker formally.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. A very warm good morning to all the participants who have joined in today. A dynamic Chairman of SIRC, CA Dungarchand Jain, my fellow council colleague and the senior most council member of our council, CA Naresh Chandra Gelli sir, and our beloved speaker for the day, CA Nagadurga Sudhakar sir. My dear participants, as the Chairman and Gelli sir both very rightly put it, this is a very, very important topic. Yes, sometimes you might think, what is this last day to having such an important topic? We're all busy filing the return of income. All things considered, we must also respect our members in industry who only have their free time over the weekends. So in order to help them have such a eminent personality, eminent speaker such as Nagadurga sir, I think we had to accommodate it in such a manner that it may not be convenient for some, but it is more convenient for the people who are more interested and tuned into the specific issues in this particular industry. I'm sure the members who are not able to join in today will watch it on video, but having a live interaction with such an important speaker is something of paramount importance. I must add that our course is so unique. It is one of the few courses in the world where when you have a practicing chartered accountant, you have a person in the industry, you have a person in some sort of role. Everyone in whatever role capacity they are, they've had some experience of that practice world because of the articleship or because of the early days in the profession. Our speaker today is someone who's holding such a high post in the industry, but has experienced what it is to be an auditor on the other side. So his inputs and his views that he'll be sharing today, I'm sure will benefit all chartered accountants, not only those in industry, especially it will benefit people who are in practice. I have the privilege of introducing now our eminent speaker of the day, CA Nagadurga Sudhakar. He's a chartered accountant with more than 15 years of experience in the field of accounting and auditing. He is currently working as Director of Finance in the Global Financial Reporting team of Dr. Reddy's Laboratories. He has been working with Dr. Reddy's for more than 10 years now, and his role there encompasses analysis of complex accounting transactions, interpretation and conversion of IFRS and Ind AS point of view perspective, and to ensure appropriate accounting disclosures. He also provides training to the entire finance function of Dr. Reddy's across various locations in India and internationally. Prior to joining Dr. Reddy's, he was in the SKS Microfinance for 1 year and was in statutory audit division of KPMG for 5 years. He also is a resource faculty for the ICAI in imparting training and as part of the Ind AS certification course. He's also one of the technical reviewers in the FRRB of ICAI. I think it's fair to say a speaker is a person of many hats and many talents, and a person who also knows the tax audit deadline, what challenges, how you should do the wrapping up, being his experience in the practice side as well. So welcome Nagadurga sir. It's a huge privilege to have you with us, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, joining us from Hyderabad, the pharmacy capital, as very rightly put by our Hyderabad council member, Kelly sir. So thank you so much. We're looking forward to your session, sir.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. So I'll continue, sir. Yeah. Thank you. Salva, you want me to put it on presentation mode?
Yeah, please.
Yes, sir. Yes, you can.
Yeah. Very good morning, everyone, for taking time on a Sunday morning, especially from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock, for looking up to some of the aspects that are specifically focused with a perspective on pharmaceutical industry. So, of course, having as we have only 2 hours of time, I'll not be spending too much of time on, anyways, the introduction part as such, because that has already been done. First of all, I would like to thank the entire ICAI and the members for giving me this opportunity. Yeah, and one disclaimer before getting into the topic, which is a standard disclosure that I usually give, and of course supposed to be given as part of all my trainings whenever I take or wherever I take as part of ICAI. The views and opinions that are going to be expressed are purely the personal experiences and the exposure I could get or I got as part of my profession or my exposure. But they do not necessarily mean the views of ICAI or the views of the company for which I work for. So let's get into the topic. Today I'll be taking for the next 2 hours the accounting issues in pharmaceutical industry. Yeah, there are and another small submission from my side. The company I work for predominantly, I have been exposed to international GAAP for quite some time. So I might use the terminology of IFRS and IAS. I'll be conscious enough to use the words Ind AS and Ind AS 11 series. Yeah, but please do pardon me if I keep using the words IFRS and IAS kind of stuff. Yeah, with that, let's get into the topic. As a topical index, for the next 2 hours, I thought of covering 5 topics given their importance and subtle amounts of complexities that are associated with respect to those items. So I'll be covering a portion with respect to intangible assets and somewhere relating to some items relating to inventories and some challenges and some subtle nuances that need to be focused when an entity is planning to obtain some funding aspects. When I was talking about funding, it means the challenges in consolidation, the challenges that might arise if money is sought by a pharmaceutical company from any venture capitalist or a PE investor. What sort of accounting challenges that would emerge as part and parcel of the entire funding activity. Next, we'll be covering as a breather what are the implications of change the definition of business as and it has on pharmaceutical industry when it comes to business combinations and asset accounting. And yeah, the most important point, we'll be covering some time on some matters relating to revenue aspects. Okay, we're getting into the topic straight away. The first one is with respect to intangible assets.
Sorry to interrupt. The PPT is not yet visible. If you can share the PPT.
Screen sharing is not turned on, sir.
Oh,
Turn on the screen share.
sorry.
Yeah, now
Yeah.
it's visible.
Oh, very sorry. I didn't realize that. Sorry. My extreme apologies. Yeah, getting into the topic. Yeah, first one, as I said, it is intangible assets. Before starting with, I want, one very particular thing, because this is a focused discussion on pharmaceutical industry. Even I, by nature and by generally my interest is, I will speak on certain specific references to accounting standard. When I talk about certain paragraphs in some of the accounting standards, and I go to some of the lines which cause some or bring some harshness to accounting, or okay, these are the challenges that we need to face because the accounting standard said so. I'll not stop by saying accounting standard said so, where it said and which language basically it has got in. That's so you have to please pardon me for going certain specific by giving because of giving certain specific references to accounting standard. Okay, coming into the topic, intangible assets. I'll share with you one of my experiences I had in the past with respect to one of the paragraphs that caught my attention in IAS 38. Intangible assets. There is one paragraph 25, which talks about what should an entity do at the time of separate acquisition of an intangible asset. The word separate, they used it separate acquisition because it was acquired outside of a business combination. So you can acquire any asset by way of a business combination, and anything outside of a business combination as a mere asset acquisition. As I said, I'll be sharing one of my experiences. In 2008 and 9 financial year, Dr. Reddy's shifted from its SEC reporting, which was in United States, from US GAAP framework to IFRS framework. So 2009, it was the first year where Dr. Reddy's has shifted, started preparing financial statements in IFRS mode, and they reported the first IFRS financial statements to the Securities and Exchange Commission. There is one practice with the SEC, and whenever any financial statements are presented, SEC has a habit of asking questions to the entity. Can you please explain the accounting for this, by way of writing comment letters? All this is there in the correspondences as part of public domain. That's the reason why I'm little confident in giving this. So one of the comments that was given by SEC to the financial statements then was, can you please explain the accounting policy with respect to in-licensing of product compounds? Because our history or our previous experience was with US GAAP, and US GAAP was little particular about, it has its own restrictions with respect to capitalizing an in-licensing compound under specific circumstances. We elaborated them saying, when they asked us, can you please explain what sort of in-licensing deals you have? We just said, we generally take half-finished pharmaceutical compounds, and we will try to, complete the balance compound. And because of our past restrictive experience in the US GAAP framework, we elaborated them saying, generally we will ensure that we will have refund clauses there, and because even if something happens, probably we'll get our money secured. Because of the refund clauses and because of the very fact that the compound's status of development is almost on the final stage, we are fairly confident that the money can be put on balance sheet. You'll not be surprised, the response that came from SEC is by quoting paragraph 25, what is now appearing on the screen. They mentioned, with whatever that I have highlighted in that paragraph, why are you looking at economic benefits criterion with respect to in-licensing compounds, when paragraph 25 itself asks you not to look at economic benefit criterion? What does it mean? The framework of IFRS defines asset having two criteria. One, control has to be there. Second, probable economic benefits shall be there. Paragraph 25 is basically a slight demarcation from the framework's reference, that you need not look at economic benefits criteria, because whenever business happens between two prudent business personalities, nobody does basically any charity in business. When I pay you something, I pay you considering all the risks involved. So the price paid by an entity to another entity for purchase of an intangible incorporates all the levels of risk and incorporates all the elements of challenges that are associated. So on day one, there is no alternative for you to say that I will not do capitalization, or you need to incorporate certain refund clauses. In fact, I would rather say, for me, this particular, on paragraph 25, the teacher is the Securities and Exchange Commission. They in fact very elaborately explained us, when you are looking at paragraph 25 or purchase of an in-licensed compounds, you need not look at the percentage of completion, you need not look at the phase of development, you need not look at the uncertainty attached to the development of that particular product going forward, or with respect to the inflow of that money, whether you will get or not, or when you will get, or how much you will get. Please don't be bothered about all such uncertainties. You can jolly well capitalize on day one. What does this point mean? This means capitalization is not a choice. It is not at the whims and fancies of an entity that, okay, I'm okay to keep it on balance sheet. Fine, it is a challenge taken by the company, a bet taken by the company. Let us see how does this product work. So I want to put it on P&L account. No, capitalization is not a choice. Just to reiterate, if the transaction meets a paragraph 25 requirements of IAS 38, especially with respect to in-licensing of a product. In-licensing of a product separately outside the business combination. When you are procuring something, it goes with the very economic rationale that you are paying something for another entity, means you are paying because you knew that there is some economic value. So it is basically is giving us an exception to what framework or what a generally perceived idea of an asset, that it should have two criteria. One is with respect to control, with respect to economic benefits. Economic benefits need not be at that point in time to be very, very heavily emphasized on. You need not be heavily emphasizing on that matter, and you can actually jolly well recognize it. So this is one, in a way, a revelation kind of a thing at that point in time for us. We thought, okay, paragraph 25 very clearly articulates and emphasizes that capitalization is not a choice. You need to start capitalizing it, and how do we account for it? This 25 has to be read along with paragraph 42, which talks about how should you deal with the subsequent development aspect of the IP R&D you have procured. So this type of a half-finished compound, which has acquired by the pharmaceutical company, is, we all know that it is called IP R&D. And what should we do with the balance activity or balance development activity? Where paragraph 42 very clearly articulates that if you are still in a research phase, please charge off. If you are in a development phase, please look up to para 57 conditions, where the 6 conditions have been laid down. That, okay, boss, you need to take care of these things before deciding whether you want to capitalize that item or not. Okay, moving forward, with the same example, we'll just move forward. So we have an intangible asset which is half finished. For ease of understanding, let's assume that the half finished compound means it's a phase 1 complete. Yeah, for example, take example sake, I have taken phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 types of development, which is an innovator's way of developing a particular thing. Now, imagine yourself as a buyer. You bought a half finished compound. Now you have to complete the development aspect of the balance complete the development of the compound. There are 2 ways of doing it. Let's take 2 instances. There are 2 ways of doing it. I have given situation 1 in one way and situation 2 in another way. And let us see how does the accounting work in both the situations. Situation 1. In a pharmaceutical industry, we know very well that even though a person has in-licensed the compound from the other party, generally we might involve, in most of the circumstances, we will involve the other party for carrying out the development activities, either by way of a development partner or by way of outsourcing the CRO activity back to him, so that you will give me a completed development completed product so that I can actually commercialize it, while the rights are retained by the buyer. Let's assume in a situation 1, we bought a half-finished pharmaceutical product. and we gave that product back to him for the purpose of completing the balance development activity. When I said I gave the product back to him, he was appointed as a CRO for us for carrying out the balance development activity. Who takes the risk? We take. As a buyer, the company, the buyer takes the risk of development. I will compensate him. The agreement's structure is as under. I will compensate him for the efforts carried out in the following manner. Upon completion of 100 patients in phase 2, I will pay you 30 crores. And let's assume that the upfront amount is 10 crores. And I will pay you upon completion of 100 patients, 30 crores. And in phase 3, completion of 1000 patients, I will pay you 50 crores. And then upon completion of filing, I will pay 100 crores to you. All in all, what we are trying to say is the product is almost 190, 200 crore worth, where you are basically paying him for the completed development activity. A closer look at the terms used in the structure reveal that this is basically a compensation for the work done. So I am not putting any success-based milestones as a compensation to him. I'm saying as and when you keep working on the product and you reach a particular milestone, irrespective of the fact whether that milestone at that point in time brings any value in terms of intellect to the product or not, I will compensate you. See the language that has been used: completion of dosage for 100 patients, completion of dosage for 1000 patients. It's bound to happen. Am I talking about any results of that dosing? No. Am I talking about any obtaining of regulatory approval? No. Upon filing, I will pay you. So whenever you bought any intangible asset which is half finished and you involve the other party, for that matter need not be the other party itself or any other party, where the compensation is based on the efforts. Nomenclature is regardless, how you term it is regardless, but in substance, if the compensation to the other party is towards the work done by him, not for the results that he has shown to me, the entire structure changes and it goes to as a development all by yourself and has to be evaluated under para 57. We'll come to what happens in para 57. Obviously, we know very much that para 57 generally does not allow capitalization before the technical feasibility gets demonstrated. We'll come to that point. While we say that, so the possible accounting for situation 1 based on the given facts is, except for the 10 crores which was paid as an upfront fee under paragraph 25, which gets capitalized, balance 30 plus 50 plus 100, 180 crore gets expensed off as an R&D charge into your P&L account. Let's flip it. I entered into a different structure for the same scenario in a different way. After phase 1 completion, I approach the seller of the compound, in a way the developer of the compound, who is a small company. Boss, I'll pay you 10 crore, you please transfer the rights to me, and the transfer of rights is not for the compound in its substance right now. You please give me an advance payment, and basically I'm giving you an advance for marketing rights of the product. So the product gets remained in the name of the seller, and I am funding you, and I am only interested in in obtaining the marketing rights of the product. I am no way interested in your development risks. I don't want to take any risks. It is the same 190 crores compensation. See if you change the structure, how the accounting would change. I'll pay you 10 upfront, and I will pay you 30, 50, and 100 in a different form. How is it? It is a success-based milestones. I'll not pay you whether you finish 100 patients or 1000 patients. I'll pay you only when once you successfully complete phase 2 and phase 3. Successful completion of phase 2 and phase 3 will be evidenced by respect to discussions with regulators and certain approvals from the regulators. So they create themselves some benchmark with respect to what is a successful payment and the successful outcome, and based on the successful outcome, the buyer will start compensating the seller for the development that he has shown in the product. Now see the difference between both the situations. It is same 190 crores that has been paid by the buyer to the seller of the compound, but in one case the seller is also a developer and he is taking it only as the seller is doing the work only as an agent. the entire development risk is taken by the buyer. So buyer in the sense the one that actually procured the compound. You can structure an arrangement if, of course, with all due respect that the other party agrees to it or not, in a way where you will take the whole development risk, or you can structure an arrangement where the other party takes the whole development risk. So the number of times you carry out the work for phase 2 and phase 3 is irrelevant for the buyer in situation 2. He simply says in situation 2, I will pay you only on successful completion of phase 2. Whether you do it 3 times, 4 times, I am least bothered. In such a case, the entire arrangement falls under paragraph 25. Each and every money or consideration that the company pays to them is basically a compensation for the marketing rights, which will come to me at a later point in time. So all the amounts are basically towards an intangible in progress scenario. Everything is basically an IPR&D payment. So effectively in a situation 2 scenario, he can keep the entire 190 crores on balance sheet, which will be tested for impairment as per IAS 36 regulations because it is not yet ready for use on an annual basis along with indication testing. Whereas in situation 1, he would end up putting only 10 crores on balance sheet and balance 180 crores on P&L account because he takes the development risk. While substance is definitely over the form, but in fact, for the purpose of creating something, you need to first of all understand what sort of an implication that form can bring you on the table first. Where in one case, the structure is that I'm only compensating him for the efforts done, and in another case, I'm only compensating him for the results shown. If you can show me very clearly an accretion to the product in terms of development, I'll pay you. It's clearly an intangible asset. Irrespective of the development, I'll pay you for whatever the work that has been done by you is a clear development cost likely to be charged off in profit and loss account. Yeah, moving on. Another form. So we have taken the same intangible asset which is half finished. We wanted to complete the balance development either by way of co-development or by way of structured payments on the successful completion of the product is one way. Another, the third one, which is basically I wanted to harp on here, the development will be taken over completely by the buyer internally. So internal development of an intangible asset. Here, of course, there is nothing new which I am going to explain you, but I want to bring you some, a possible and an alternative way of looking at it. Paragraph 57 talks about capitalization criteria that have to be demonstrated by an entity before starting any penny to be put on balance sheet in terms of development costs. Well, it lists down 6 criteria. The most important criteria for pharmaceutical industry is the point A, which talks about a technical feasibility for completing the asset so that the asset is available for use. The word technical feasibility has not been explained by the accounting standard anywhere. It only says, or it only asks for, along, reading along with what has been explained in paragraph 25. Is the accounting standard pro capitalization or against capitalization? No second thoughts, it's pro capitalization. But because of little grayness attached to what technical feasibility means, the world predominantly depends on the guidance given by various accounting bodies like Big Four, and in almost all the cases, all the Big Fours very clearly have ruled out that technical feasibility is not achieved unless it is actually achieved. Meaning, unless the company obtains the approval of the regulator, we can't basically demonstrate point A. So that is the reason why predominantly in pharmaceutical industry, I use the word predominantly because there are definitely instances across the globe where companies could successfully demonstrate technical feasibility with respect to some of the products. Okay, when I talk about some of the products for the lead markets like US and UK itself. So there are companies that have demonstrated, but predominantly going by the guidance currently that is being used by various regulators or very heavily by the audit firms or by the accountants. The technical feasibility is said to have been established by the company only and only when once the company obtains the approval. Is that the intent of the accounting standard? Prima facie, it looks not the case, because if that were to be the intent, he would have given some kind of an reference somewhere that it can be capitalized by a pharmaceutical company only upon approval. Yeah, but of course, having said that, considering all the complexities associated with the product development, unless and until the technical feasibility, which is practically being referred to as the date on which the approval has been sought. My objective is not to say the same thing which is already known to you. My objective is not to say the development costs have to be charged off because of this reason. While development costs are charged off, especially for geographies like US and UK, which are highly regulated, out of my various readings, I saw some element of hope when it comes to less regulated markets, and which are called leveraged filings. Leveraged filings, for the interest of, I'll just take 1 minute to explain it. You will have one lead market, United States or UK. You must have filed the product there and must have obtained the approval. Based on the base development data, you will take the reference listed drug in another country like Australia or any other, New Zealand or something of that sort, or some other country, and based on that reference listed drug, you will have to establish some pharmacoequivalence and bioequivalence studies. You will do that bridge study, and you will file it there in Australia or in another geography or New Zealand. The regulator there accepts all the development data that has been filed by the company for US and UK. He will not ask you to repeat it for him. So basically, this kind of a filing is called leveraged filing. When you do a thing for leveraged filing, so to draw a very, very close analogy, I can give you 2 examples. Generally, a chartered accountant from Institute of Chartered Accountant of India will be given certain exemptions by some of the geographies when you are pursuing equivalent course in that country. Similarly, are there any exemptions that are given by other geographies for the base work that you have carried out for US and UK? If yes, you can actually start exploring with proper documentation, provided you have a proper documentation, that whether technical feasibility has been established by the company already for the second geography. I'm not getting into the point that whether you can establish for US or UK. It predominantly looks, at least based on the practicalities and as such, it is not possible kind of a scenario, or majority of the cases it is not possible. Another, in a way, a light at the end of the tunnel, or I would rather say another exploration probably which you can think of is, for a leveraged filing, can you think of, because the filing itself accepts some of the data that has been used for US and UK can be used even here. Maybe the development costs incurred for this bridge study, has technical feasibility been already established by the company at that point in time? Maybe yes. That said, I'm not saying that this is possible, yes or no kind of a thing. Answer is definitely, I'm not giving any binary kind of a thing. It depends on the stage of development. It depends on the country where the regulation has to be carried out. Sometimes they might do, like countries like Russia and countries like China, they might ask, even though your product is filed in US or UK and approved, live and running, they might still ask us to carry out certain specific tests on the respective ethnic population. Again, so depending on the regulator's requirement, depending on the stage of development, depending on the complexity, the very nature of the product itself, it is, while there is a possibility, yeah, at the same point in time, you need to base your documentation in a methodical way. Basically, you need to establish technical feasibility in a particular way. So that's the thing I just wanted to share when it comes to intangible assets. So just to reiterate, with respect to intangible assets, capitalization is not a choice. You have to capitalize, and there is a feasibility when it comes to separately acquired intangible assets, irrespective of the stage of development. You can capitalize it using the reference given in paragraph 25. And after that, how you structure when it comes to subsequent development of the compound, how the development was taken forward by the company by way of compensating the party for the work done, or compensating the party only for the actual result and accretion shown in the development. The accounting differs. That's it. When we come to internally generated intangible assets, look out for technical feasibility. You might establish or possibility of establishing technical feasibility for other geographies where there is a leveraged filing kind of a thing. So this is predominantly with respect to intangible asset when I talked about the topic which I will be considering for pharmaceutical industry. The second thing which I want to move on and consider this is with respect to inventories. Of course, not significant, I would rather say the principles with respect to inventories are fairly established. Like, exhibit batches cannot be capitalized because they are not inventories. Validation batches, the moment they can be sold, can be considered as an inventory, which is already an established position. I'm not going to again explain the same thing because we are anyways all from the pharmaceutical industry. But there is one point which, from a theory point of view and from practice point of view, there is a clear divergence with respect to the practice of the companies. Taking the same example forward, so we bought an intangible asset which for 10 crores, we subsequently somehow have completed the development of the product, and we are in terms of time stamping the last stage. In fact, we filed for the approval, and approval will be obtained based on regulation or whatever that in another 5 to 6 months time kind of a scenario. Currently, you don't see any challenge with respect to obtaining the approval. Obviously, practically putting it forward, once you get the approval any point in time, you need to be ready with all the other arsenal as well. I need to keep the inventory ready. So you started commercial manufacturing of the same product for which filing has been made, no approval has been obtained. Obviously, tomorrow if you get an approval, you won't have inventory all of a sudden. So you need to make yourself commercially ready. So you have commercially made yourself ready by manufacturing some element of inventory. Now, putting forward very, very strictly, is that inventory at all worth keeping on balance sheet at that point in time? Probably this question would have, generally, if you look at the financial statements of various other companies, there will be divergent views. One practical view that has been given is, as per theory, okay, starting with theory, is this actually an inventory that can be capitalized? The same example speaks of the same thing, basically that management, in this case that we limited still is, hasn't established the technical feasibility and hence hasn't capitalized any development costs. At that point in time, if it wanted to manufacture some inventory and it wants to keep that inventory on balance sheet, is it inventory at all in the first place? That was the question that was asked in this question. So inventory as defined by Ind AS 2 is anything that is held for sale by the company, or which is in the process of manufacturing, or anything that is used as component in the process of manufacturing the goods, basically raw material, work in progress and finished goods. Under which aspect this particular inventory not yet approved by the regulator will fit in? A very theoretical answer is no. It is not inventory that qualifies for capitalization under IAS 2. As I said, there are certain practical views that have been given by the company, by various accounting bodies. If you refer to manuals released by PwC or EY for that matter, they incorporate an element of practicality. If company can establish with proper documentation that the filing is almost a finality and there is no uncertainty that the company foresees with respect to obtaining the approval, they said that maybe the company is fine with keeping so much amount of inventory on the balance sheet. What is that I'm planning to bring out here? As I said, it is not an, when we clearly look at it from the lens of an accounting standard, as I said, one particular view might one might get is this is not an inventory, that it should not be kept on balance sheet kind of a view. Another view is boss brings them in, practicality to it. Nobody is basically capitalizing development cost here. I am not capitalizing development cost. I am not creating an intangible asset. But yeah, boss, this is not something that will run for years. Maybe in some 3 or 4 months time or 5 to 6 months time down the lane, I will get the approval of the regulator. So it's basically a commercial readiness. That's the reason why I created some inventory. So depending on the level of documentation that the company could present and demonstrate, there is a practicality attached to it, and then both PwC book and as well as the even EY book clearly specify that yeah, this is something that can be put on balance sheet. So here my submission is, if at all you have anything of this sort, please do create enough documentation for the amount of inventory that you are planning to capitalize or you are planning to take another alternative view to put it on balance sheet. So clearly it is a matter of demonstration by the company by establishing what is the stage of filing. Sometimes the filing might require a number of back and forth discussions with the regulator, and regulator might ask us, and we don't know clearly what will happen to the fate of the last filing. At that point in time, the answer is maybe you should not be manufacturing that kind of a product then, and you should not be keeping such amount of inventory at that point in time. So it clearly goes back to, while the answer is not clearly on a black or white kind of a scenario, please do maintain, if such kind of a scenario is there, enough documentation that supports why you believe so much amount of inventory is worth putting it on balance sheet. That said, I want to show you one of the excerpts from annual report of Novartis, which is a pharma giant. And as I said, it is mind-boggling, basically, because if you look at note 14 of Novartis annual report, which talks about inventories, where the highlighted component by me in terms of that circle shows what the company does with such kind of an inventory. You know what the Novartis does? Basically, it charges off the entire inventory that was kept ready for commercialization, and it reinstates the inventory only upon approval. And see the numbers. And see, I mean, I was literally overwhelmed by their stance taken on an accounting policy when I was reading this annual report. See, I mean, see the cost of their adherence to accounting principle. For 2019, if you take the numbers as such, where I'm highlighting it basically there, it is millions of dollars. They have charged off $752 million of inventory, which was kept ready for for launch. That means inventory that is manufactured for launch sale has been charged off to the tune of $752 million. How much they have reinstated back? They reinstated back to 18 or 216 to $18 million. Means that cycle continues. You can see it for 2018 and 2017. See their consistency and see their, gutsy attachment to that accounting principle that if it is not inventory as per theory, okay, I am ready to charge it off. You can actually see it for the purpose of consistency sake, even last 5 years or 6 years back as well. They charge off any inventory that is kept ready for the purpose of launch because it was not, the product did not receive the approval, they will charge off the entire amount of inventory. See the number, $752 million. How many companies would have a net, revenue to the tune? And they reinstated $218 million of inventory after obtaining the approval, and the cycle continues. That said, I'm not saying this is right or this is wrong kind of a thing. See, the harshest of the stances are taken by one of the companies when it comes to an accounting principle. That said, I will come back to my point that, okay, whenever you encounter this kind of a situation anywhere, if you are an auditor, please do ask for the documentation. If you are basically an accountant, yeah, please do prepare the documentation for the purpose of inventory that is kept ready by the company for commercial launch. This is one thing I wanted to exclusively harp on with respect to inventory. Second one is, it's pretty common in pharmaceutical industry with respect to licensing and supply arrangements. So because it's a very regulatory prone industry, when once you buy a product, just like that, you can't change the manufacturing location, especially if your product is going to be sold in United States. There is something called FDA approved plant and all that stuff. So you can't just like that change the location. So it's pretty common in pharmaceutical industry that along with license, you will have the supply. So I'll give you an example of that supply arrangement. What are the terms? Let's assume that this particular product has been exclusively, manufactured product, and at the time of in-licensing, I asked the seller one thing: boss, whatever the plant in which this product gets manufactured, you please do, keep some portion of the plant exclusively for supply of this product to me. I don't want to face any supply challenges. So I was little more hell-bent on keeping some of the plant exclusively kept ready for the to meet the supply commitments. What could be an accounting implication because of specific requests made by the buyer or specific incorporations made by the buyer in an agreement with respect to the plant and machinery that is going to be used for manufacturing this product? As a form, as an agreement, it might look as a license and supply agreement. But if you actually decipher it, this could be an embedded lease transaction. Because of IFRS 16, not exactly I would say because of IFRS 16, even earlier IAS 17 Appendix C covered this particular concept. Agreements that contain lease or not. So there is an implicit there is an implicit lease that could be perceived. I am not just asking for the material, I am also asking him, please keep certain plant and machinery ready for me so that whenever I ask, how much ever quantity I ask, you should be ready to supply so much amount of quantity. So I am not just a buyer of the product, I am also a lessee. Could be, I'm only saying that depending on the the terms of the arrangement. If I say that, boss, you keep A, B, C, D assets exclusively ready, and you have to actually keep using it only for me, and nobody else can use it for me, and it is not easy for the seller to substitute these assets with somebody else. So always, please keep your fingers crossed and keep your antennas very tight when it comes to supply arrangements where there are certain restrictions on the plant usage. And it is pretty common in pharmaceutical industry. Not all machinery every time is interchangeably or can be interchangeably used. If I'm exclusively using or asking for usage of any property, plant and equipment for supply of the product, please be aware of the fact that there could be an embedded lease. So I've given one of the examples where in this case is, see the terms of the agreement. C enters into a 2-year agreement with an experienced drug manufacturer S to exclusively manufacture two well-established drug compounds for the United States. The contract explicitly specifies the manufacturing facility. See, IFRS 16 covers at the time of saying when you want to decipher whether there is a lease or not, there can be an explicit mention or there can be an implicit provision. So sometimes in pharma, you need not explicitly mention that if a product has to be manufactured, it has to be manufactured only in an FDA location. That it is not easy for you to substitute that location. So it need not be explicit always, especially when it comes to pharmaceutical industry. Sometimes it can be implicit as well. So please be cognizant of or aware of IFRS 16 provisions when you are talking about inventory. Purchase of inventory, committed purchases of inventory from a specific point. And see, and S does not have a right of substitute, which is a clear requirement of IFRS 16, that if there is no right of substitution, there will be an embedded lease. The specified facility, the contract specifies monthly volumes of 2 drug compounds that need to be delivered by the supplier. Supplier only has one product line to fulfill the contractual requirements. Fine. While the example was specifically given to come to an answer that the contract had leases, the submission is, please do look out for any such either incorporations as the buyer has asked in an agreement or the contract as such would result in these kind of restrictions. I will decide how much to manufacture. I will decide when to manufacture. I will decide when to keep so much amount of machinery idle. In fact, I am the one who is controlling that. I am the one who is a lessee from a lease transaction. So while the form merely looks like supply arrangement, another common example is, take a case of development and not development, distribution and services agreement, supply agreement, where there is one entity that takes out the material from your factory, warehouses it, and supplies it based on the invoices you have made. So you have entered into a distribution and services agreement. The nature of the agreement is distribution and services agreement, but a close analysis of the agreement might reveal a lease component. What is it? Where could be a lease? Leasing when it comes to warehousing. In pharmaceutical industry, we all know the warehousing has its own requirements. There can be an ambient warehousing where you will have forklifts. There can be a cold storage for some of the products which need to be kept, or where there can be another type of storage requirement which is specific to that particular product. Now, implicit in this distribution and services agreement, a warehousing service where the contract has incorporated, boss, I need this much amount of space. You can't, basically you need to guarantee me so much amount of space. 25% of your floor space has to be restricted to usage of for warehousing purposes of company A. A and B entered into a distribution services agreement. B is a distribution service provider. A said that in the agreement, 25% of your floor space has to be used for me. Over 25% in a way is an embedded lease in the distribution services agreement. How should I carve out the lease component? You will, for warehousing, you will put some value in the whole contract, right? So for how many years you will have the agreement, those many number of years into money paid towards that warehousing component, discounted to present value, will be your leased asset, right of use asset, and lease liability. So please be aware of embedded lease in a host servicing contract or a host supply contract. This is what I just want to specifically embark on when it comes to inventory as such. So far we have finished intangibles portion as well as inventory component. I want to now take up the third component is with respect to funding arrangements. This particular component might take some time. I personally am very, very attached to this particular concept. In fact, sorry, you have to correct me. I stand corrected. It is not Ind AS 2. It is in fact Ind AS 110, 109. So what is it? What are the requirements and what are the challenges here? See, I would rather say in my at least 15 years of experience, the challenges surrounding this particular area are evolving. 10 years back, I haven't seen companies facing this kind of a challenge here in this area when compared to the challenges the companies are facing in the last 2 to 3 years. Because of the competition or because of the various other market challenges, it's always on the top list for the company to obtain funding for your product development. And also, the accounting for development of a compound does not support. It's not a P&L beneficial accounting treatment. Predominantly, it goes into profit and loss account. First of all, I am losing money and there is no P&L benefit coming in. So, of late, the most the latest trend in pharmaceutical industry is, why don't we find out a partner for funding one of the key compounds of our company? Let me be very honest on this. The GAAP requirements, the accounting requirements are pretty clear. Because it was not focused very much in the past, it sometimes might come out as a surprise for us because of the latest requirements and to an extent certain change positions. So whenever you are encountering any situation or you have to deal with accounting with respect to funding for your one of the in-process development compounds, please do bear in mind certain accounting standards. I will now come with one example and then probably I will continue my flow. Let's follow this example. T Pharma is developing a pharmaceutical compound, Compound X, which has successfully passed through phase 2 clinical trials. Means I have to now do another phase 3, which is the most important point in a product development. R Ventures, please underline the name of that entity. R Ventures means it's not actually a pharmaceutical company, it is basically a venture capitalist. So a pharmaceutical company is tying up with a venture capitalist for funding or obtaining sufficient amount of funding for Compound X to get it through the development activity of phase 3. So R Ventures offers to fund for T phase 3 clinical trial studies and all the registration costs. The study results and documentation will be the property of R. Means R takes over the complete results of that particular product. T has an obligation to acquire the studies and documentation if Compound X receives regulatory approval. See the obviously, what would a company do, a venture capitalist do, if there is a successful outcome of a product? I'll give you very close example to this. I think most of us must be very closely watching the vaccine development for corona. While there are many vaccine candidates are there, AstraZeneca is there, Pfizer is there, Moderna is there. One is even from the Russia. If you look out in any newspaper, the Russian vaccine candidate Sputnik V is owned by an investment banker. How did he own? He owned it, maybe if somebody were to relate it back, he could have owned because he funded the whole product development of that particular institute or industry of the company. So it's in fact RDIF. There is an investment banker that owns this particular drug compound, which does the out licensing activity. Now the catch here in terms of commercial sense is, what would an PE investor or a venture capitalist do with a drug compound? Obviously, he has to monetize it. How does he monetize? Very a known way of monetizing it. I will sell it back to you, or I will license it back to you. So the company initially took the funding from the banker, and because it has to now monetize its own funding requirements, or because he has funded, the product will come back to me and I will pay you back some extra money. I have taken 100 and I will pay you 250. See and continue the example. T has an obligation to acquire the product, and T will pay a milestone which is equivalent to 150% of the estimated development costs. So if I have taken a fund of 100 from you, I will pay you 150. Both have monetized, so the cost of funding for me is 150. T will also pay 5% of royalty on sales for 5 years. Now, going by the example, what happens if the product is not getting developed, or if the product development goes for a complete loss? Fine, R will take the complete loss. So, from a T's point of view, for whatever the money it has initially taken for 100, whatever that 100 he has taken, unless and until the product obtains regulatory approval, there is no requirement for him initially to repay the money. Is it straight away giving you an aspect of liability? Straight away it doesn't give you an answer, because there is no present obligation for me to pay the money back. So generally our minds are to an extent clouded by the requirements of Ind AS 37, provisions, contingent liabilities and contingent assets, which says that a liability is a present obligation as a result of past events. There is no present obligation for me for my 100. So is it a liability or not? But unfortunately, there is another accounting standard that talks about the whole scenario, which is IAS 32, which defines equity and liability components. So whenever you have these kind of an arrangements, please do understand there are certain provisions in the IFRS or Ind AS that exclusively deal with or require you to establish certain provisions. First and foremost, characteristic features of a investment entity. because the other person is not basically a pharma company. There is a perceived discomfort that the other party is not truly a partner for you. He's not actually a collaborating partner for you. Maybe he's a funding partner who wants to take the money back. So IFRS 10 or Ind AS 110, paragraph B85 talks about fundamental characteristic feature of an investment entity. It says exit strategy. What is exit strategy here? He is very clear. R Ventures is very clear in this example. He is paying you 100 and he is taking 150 back. And he will move out of the deal. Every year he will get 5% if the product is a damn success. So he wants to move out. He doesn't want to continue with the commercialization aspect. He secured his royalty and he secured his upfront payment as well. So this, to an extent, gives the reader or an accounting standard setter or from an accounting standard point of view, as I said, a perceived discomfort that the other party is not truly a partner in development. Is actually a partner in financing only. So when there is some kind of a exit strategy given to you, the other party, you have to remove all the corporate wheels and you have to say that the other party is a financing entity. What happens? Now there are two more paragraphs, which is paragraph 19 of IAS 32. IAS 32 is basically about presentation of financial instruments, definition of financial liability. It says two things. When there is an unavoidable right to avoid payment, I have an unconditional right to avoid payment. Unconditional right to avoid payment. If you have that, you can say that the instrument is an equity instrument. If you don't have an unconditional right to avoid payment, here what is conditional payment? If the product receives regulatory approval, I have to pay. So even though it is outside the control of an entity, it is still a financial liability, is what paragraph 19 of IAS 32 specifies. Coupled with it, there is another paragraph, 6 numbers after it, para 25. Even if that conditional payment is based on contingent payments like royalty or profit sharing, all whatever may be, which is purely outside the control of both the funding partner as well as the company, be it so, it is still a financial liability. So what appears to us on a paper that the other party came to me and has funded this program, it might altogether change the position that he is not actually a funding partner. Sorry, he is not actually an equity participant. He is even actually a liability, presentation of whatever the money that has been given. Meaning, if you look at this example, fine, as a company T, I got some money. Who said that first of all this money is an equity participant? I must have taken a loan. So on day one itself, it is a loan, and I have to keep accumulating it and input it on my balance sheet. At what value I should put? Fine, we will start with 100. It's not just 100, because you have an obligation to pay 150 at the end. You have a responsibility to bring it to 150 based on the development by the time the product's development reaches approval. This 50 is nothing but cost of borrowing, which will be recognized as an interest charge over the period of development. Now the catch is, will the answer be different if entity R subscribes to the equity instrument of a company for giving that 100 crores? Now I'm making it little more interesting. I don't call it complex or tricky. I want to make it little more interesting, but I did not give you any money. You please give me 15-20% of your stake so that I will give you 100 crores. Does it make any difference? Now is the catch. Look at that particular instrument from IAS 32 point of view, paragraph 19 and paragraph 25. In the given case, prove it that that instrument issued is not an equity instrument, but rather a liability instrument. So even if R subscribes to the equity capital of company T for the purpose of funding one of the product development, it is still a liability in the books of account. that liability has to be proved up at every period end using FVTPL categorization, differential going to profit and loss account. I repeat, even if R subscribes to the equity share capital of company T, the accounting for this transaction is that the equity subscription is a liability in the books of account. You will not get any NCI benefit, also non-controlling interest, where the portion gets carved out, because you don't have an unconditional right to avoid payment after the product development, because you have to pay 150% of what you have taken. Continuing the example, what if the company R, the funder, and the company T decided to incorporate a new company where I will invest the compound and that fellow will invest his that money by way of subscription to that? What should be the accounting? Now, it first goes to IFRS 10. IFRS 10 talks about consolidation. Who has to consolidate this particular entity? Now, let's make it little more interesting. The company that has invested the product, which is company T, has invested only 10%, has subscribed only to 10% of equity. R, because he has given significant amount of money, has taken 98% of that equity. Percentage wise, it appears that R should consolidate. Now, IFRS 10 also gives you a particular position to be evaluated by us in the form of structured entities. This is a structured entity for carrying out the development of a particular compound. Now, in the case of structured entities, the nature, purpose, and design of an entity to be taken into consideration. Now, between R and T, who has the bandwidth, who has an expertise, who has an intellect to discuss, deliberate, and decide on a product development? Can an investment banker do it? If he can do it, please document it and demonstrate that he can do it. That's the reason why I have used the word, there is a perceived discomfort whenever your partner is an investment banker as a PE investor. You need to rebut that perception. You need to demonstrate that this guy can still participate in that effective decision making, because Ind AS 110 asks the decision making with respect to relevant activities. Your relevant activities are towards product development. As a pharma company, will you be having an upper hand, or a private investor will have an upper hand who is an investment banker? Will ICICI Bank have an upper hand on product development, or will Dr. Reddy's have an upper hand on product development? It's anybody's guess. You will have an upper hand. When you have it, you cannot easily rule it out from IFRS 10. So with 10%, you might have to consolidate the whole entity. Brilliant. Will I take out the NCI of 90? Again, put it back. The lens of IFRS 9, financial instruments, IAS 32. What did we do? That particular entity, when it got the equity instrument, that equity instrument is no more an equity instrument under IAS 32 for the newly incorporated entity, but rather it is a liability. So line by line consolidation, entire cost comes to you with no benefit of NCI. What did you achieve? You thought on paper you have achieved something, you would end up achieving nothing. Entire cost will be your cost only. You will not even get basically an NCI benefit as well. Why I am harping specifically on IAS 32 and IFRS 9? Go back and read the scope paragraphs of Ind AS 110 and Ind AS 111. Joint arrangements and consolidations. The scope paragraph excludes transactions that are under IAS 32 and IFRS 9. If a transaction has to be dealt with under financial instruments, it is out of IFRS 10 and IFRS 11. So out of my experience, I am giving you one checklist kind of a thing. When somebody invests either in a debt instrument or in a liability instrument, first look out to IAS 32 and IFRS 9. Is it something, a financial instrument that has to be exclusively accounted for under these two? If answer is yes, you will not be able to argue in favor of 10 and 11. You have to account for it there. If you want to structure it in a particular way, make sure that it moves out of IFRS 9 first. Then it moves out of IFRS 10. Then you can talk about joint arrangement or joint operation, or later on any other instrument that has to be accounted for. So It is a normal funding, anyways it's a liability. It is an equity infusion, even then it can have the characteristic features of liability. That entire position can go to a liability accounting. Third one, okay, I don't want to do either in your company or my company, let's incorporate a new company. Perceived answer could be, most likely answer could be, because of the structured entities accounting, you will end up consolidating the same. And again, going by IAS 32 principles, the subscription to equity in that new entity may not get classified as equity, but rather get classified as a liability. Then, okay, let's not incorporate a new company. Let's talk about Ind AS 111 joint arrangements. Let's jointly participate in a joint arrangement. I will give you something and you give me some money for that particular development. Same thing, same principles. As I said, it starts first with a discomfort that the other party is not actually a joint partner. What is a joint arrangement? It says, unanimous decision-making authority. Please prove it that a joint investor, not just in terms of right, what is he trying to establish by way of participation in a joint steering committee? What sort of decisions he can take with respect to product development? So imagine the level of demonstrations that you need to do if at all you have to establish any funding arrangement that can give you some relief to profit and loss account. The main objective of me bringing up this particular concept is to see how ring-fenced the accounting is, how structured that accounting is. We need to be very, very careful in terms of documenting what sort of rights that you are giving to other party, what sort of rights that you are going to give, you are going to retain in terms of product development funding arrangements. So all these principles were already there. But the only fact is, because this topic is assuming significant importance of late, all these provisions are now getting more and more importance and they're coming out. So the first and foremost, please be very much thorough with respect to the definition of an investment entity, and please rule out that the other entity is not an investment entity. Second, please do consider the structured entities concept at the time of consolidation and see what sort of purpose that is going to be achieved and how the other entity could establish control on the relevant activities if at all you are dealing with consolidation. Then in the same way, what is the contribution that the other party is going to make other than monetarily, and he is going to bring up as an expertise in terms of table, so that in case of in a joint arrangement, that I can actually truly consider him as a joint partner, and I can take credit to whatever the money that he gives me for the purpose of funding development. So whenever he says that, okay, I will fund you 50% of your development cost in the next 5 to 6 years, it may not be a case that it is always credit to R&D. It might be a case that whatever he pays is basically an amount that is sitting as a liability in the books of accounts, because you have given him an exit strategy, you have given him an option to sell it back, or you must have incorporated some sort of forward contract where you would end up buying the whole stuff back from him. Please do, please be aware of all these kind of subtle nuances that need to be considered for funding arrangements whenever you take up this kind of a position. Yeah, and that is what basically I am trying to bring out on table with respect to some of the aspects that need to be considered for funding matters. In between, not so very complex, I would rather say, maybe a breather, because I have covered something funding which is clearly some jam-packed gap-related matters. I just want to give discuss something which is pretty to an extent relaxed. One is with respect to business combinations and asset acquisitions. I just want to, basically it's a reiteration of what has already been to an extent established position. If you buy only one product as such, without any allied services, that there are no employees involved at all, predominantly the answer would be that it is an asset acquisition, that you would do it under IAS 38, and accounting is cost paid by you. It is similar to what paragraph 25, which we have covered in the instance number 1. Extension to it. Instead of one compound, you actually bought, along with marketing, right? You bought field force. Along with technology, you bought manufacturing people. Along with product, half-finished compound, along with IP R&D, you bought scientists. It might be only one product. It might be only 2 or 3 employees, whatever may be the answer. You will more likely end up basically considering it as a business combination and accounting to be considered under Ind AS 103. What is the difference between asset acquisition and business combination? You already know pretty well that it is fair valuation accounting, and the fair valuation incorporates any excess or shortage paid. If you are an IFRS filer, basically excess goes to goodwill and a reduced payment goes to profit and loss account as a bargain purchase price. Ind AS doesn't allow for P&L for a bargain purchase. It has to be recognized either through OCI directly into equity or directly into the equity, depending on certain requirements that you do it. Now, I just want to give you some leeway that has come up with a revised definition of business with respect to the last stance that I have taken for compound along with the people. I think most of you must be pretty much aware of the revised definition of business as per Ind AS 103 is that it incorporates an element of optional concentration test. What do you mean by concentration test? As the name indicates, if the money for which you are paying, it might be an entity acquisition. It might be, okay, I bought company A, I bought company B. Earlier, under the old definition or the erstwhile definition, it would be extremely difficult for you to come out of the business combination accounting. Frankly speaking, the revised definition of business, if somebody were to follow the international gap, they would very clearly can relate it. It is basically a relaxation for the entities. It takes out, because of this concentration test, that whether something has to be recognized as a business combination or can be put under only asset acquisition itself. So what the optional concentration test, this is optional, basically as per the standard. Concentration test asks us is, as the name indicates, it is a concentration test. Please remove the corporate wheel and see what exactly you are paying for. It is an entity, fine. You subscribe to 100% equity, fine. What is there in that company? The concentration test, if it reveals that if significant or substantial amount of fair value is there in single or group of similar assets, that now you got only one product along with a few scientists. Okay, optional concentration test might give you a leeway, the reason why I said might is because the analysis might go here and there because of the organized workforce that is lying in your acquisition. The optional concentration test gives you a leeway to assess whether this is a business combination or not a business combination. Let's assume that you got one scientist and significantly you paid fair value. Why is that substantial fair value? Because even the workforce will be valued. Of course, they are not put on balance sheet. The organized workforce valuation is subsumed in goodwill. So when you pay it substantially, the fair value is towards the compound. So on paper, there is a possibility for you to say what was not possible under the old accounting standard Ind AS 103 because of the old definition is now possible because of the revised definition, and if whole acquisition is concentrated on a single asset or similar assets, then you can say that this is an asset acquisition and not a business combination. What does it basically, what sort of relief it gives you? It basically takes out all the hassles of fair value, establishing fair value, bringing goodwill onto the books of account or bargain purchase price, re-establish whether there is a bargain purchase price if there is any. All these administrative hassles are taken off. You can stay put with putting amount on balance sheet with respect to how much amount you paid for it, and you can actually take it out, take the accounting under IAS 38. So just please be aware of the benefits that the new concentration test that is available to companies because of the revised definition of business as per the latest accounting standard in AS 103. So this is just I want to have a breather with respect to business combinations or asset accounting. In this, associated with it, I just want to cover one point, which is pretty common in pharmaceutical industry, that you will acquire more than one brands, which might or basically can be considered as line extensions. To give you an example, very crude example of line extension is Coke and Diet Coke. Diet Coke is a line extension of Coke. Taking it directly getting into our pharmaceutical industry, Crocin Advance and Crocin, both are paracetamol. And the pharmacokinetic studies also have clearly established that the absorption rate of paracetamol in the body, both for Crocin Advance and Crocin, is one and the same. But these two are, from legal point of view, two different brands. So did you acquire two brands? Will you put two assets on balance sheet? What is accounting? Legally is a form here. Legally, yes, these are two brands. You must have paid money for these two separately. Another example is same, Zygel and Zygel M, which is basically levocetirizine is Zygel. Zygel M is levocetirizine plus Montelukast. Both are in a way combination drug. In a way, both will address a perennial as well as a normal position, running nose, allergy, and all that stuff. So Zygel and Zygel M and Crocin Advance are these two separate intangible assets? Legally, yes. But is there any leeway available in accounting standards? Is there any commercial substance that can be considered here? Because accounting is always substance over form. These two assets can they be considered as a single one? Well, answer exactly or explicitly doesn't lie in IFRS or Ind AS here, which was not explicitly addressed. You can consider the economic substance here, which is basically my experience in pharma industry as started. Provided you provide very clearly, you document very clearly, and you demonstrate very clearly some of the aspects that these are hand in glove assets rather than to separate. Crocin and Crocin Advance, you tend to market them together. The stockists tend to stock them together. Similarly, Zygel and Zygel M, they tend to stock it together. Nobody wants to separate these two. Commercially, legally, I'm not talking about. Commercially, there won't be any buyer only for one of the brands. If somebody wants to buy Zygel, he has to buy Zygel M also. Because even for the seller, it doesn't make any sense, because there is something called loyalty in the customers that sometimes, that's the reason why brand names assume so much of amount of importance. A brand like Zygel and Zygel M cannot be owned by two different people. It's a commercial impossibility. So commercially, these two go hand in hand. Fine, these two are legally separate. On paper, Crocin Advance will have independent cash flows, Crocin will have independent cash flows. Nobody is saying that these are not two intangible assets from a legal framework point of view. But yes, definitely you can take a commercial position here with proper documentation and demonstration that boss company commercial objective represents that these two are one and the same. The manner in which I'm branding these two together is a separate another way of demonstration. The way the stockists stock these two items together is another way of demonstration. The economic life commercially does not exist for these two separately. One cannot remain with one party, another cannot remain with another party. If certain things can be made, what I have practically seen in my life is, yes, these are not two, these are one. When I said two, these can be 8 or 9. I can group 8 or 9 as one, provided you have to basically, first of all, the fundamental scientific properties have to support you. After that, your documentation also should support. So I could see an element of light at the end of the tunnel for this particular point. So I just thought of sharing this particular item with you. Yeah. Now moving on to the last topic. In fact, my favorite topic of all the accounting standards, I would say, revenue. Ind AS 115 has brought about certain changes, in fact, significant changes when compared to the previous Ind AS 18. when compared to AS 19, these are poll servant. There's no, I mean, if anybody is talking about from AS 19, AS 9 point of view, revenue recognition, what Ind AS 115 has is absolutely. Let's not even discuss that also. So considering from IAS 18 to IFRS 15 or Ind AS 115, it has some specific incorporations that explicitly affect pharmaceutical industry. One is with respect to most, I have jotted down, while there are many, I've jotted down 3 most important points which I thought of explaining. One is with respect to usage of licenses. Ind AS 115 brings about 2 types of licenses, which was not contemplated or enumerated in the previous version of the standard, which is basically a right of use license and right of access license. What do you mean by right of use? Means from day one onwards, I can use your license and I can start using that particular license in my day-to-day operations. Next, right of access license. That means ownership basically with me. I need to provide you access. Only then you will be able to work on that. Keeping aside for the time being, given the paucity of time, keeping the logics behind aside, right of use accounting treatment is over a period of time. Sorry. Right of use accounting treatment is a period of time, point in time. Right of access is over a period of time. That means if somebody gives you a license which can be operated upon by the licensee from the day one, and there are no continuing performance obligations. I should not be using the word continuous performance obligations because that was a prescription of the old accounting standard. There are no pending performance obligations. The money, wholesome money, whatever the party gets from the licensee is a point in time recognition. This is coming, I know that this might be a little surprising for some of you. You can refer to examples 54, 55, 56. There are 5 or 6 examples given by illustrative examples of IFRS 15. IFRS 15 is the only accounting standard that has 63 examples with it. No other accounting standard was released by IASB with such an elaborate example list. I'm not immediately unable to recollect whether Ind AS has similar listed publication of examples. But those who can reach out to IASB material, if you can refer to examples 54 to 56 and 57, you can actually bring out and identify the difference between what is a right of use license and what is right of access license. Very clearly they articulated right of access is over a period of time, right of use is a point in time. So the entire amount of revenue that the licensor gets in case of right of use license is an immediate recognition. And just as a matter of AstraZeneca recognized at the time of Ind AS, IFRS 15 implementation a portion of the licenses under this methodology. So if anybody could get hands on that kind of a material, you can basically refer to paragraph 54, sorry, illustrations 54, 55, 56 and 57. Second one is accounting for multiple deliverables. Licensing and supply arrangements, where we will first start with licensing the compound to him, followed by supplying the material, because obviously the licensee can get the best use of the license only once it is complemented with supply of material as well. So only when somebody complements the supply of material, there is a value to that. Otherwise, what will he do with that piece of paper? I got license, fine. There is no material. What should I do? What should I do with marketing organization? IAS 18 did not talk about accounting for multiple deliverables effectively. Ind AS 115 very clearly articulated that you need to decide how many performance obligations are there, and accordingly you need to account for it. That's the reason why I'm stopping it here is I want to take you through some of the examples. Then is with respect to measurement of consideration, variable consideration, constraint for variable consideration and all that. Let's see one of the examples. The first thing which I wanted to talk about is, as I said, right of access license, which is basically over a period of time, and what is the term period for which somebody has to account for this, if at all there is over a period of time. See this example. In this, Biotech enters into a 10-year term license with pharma, under which biotech transfers pharma the exclusive rights to sell the product using the intellectual property in a particular territory. The intellectual property is considered a right of use license and there are no other performance obligations in the arrangement. Pharma makes non-refundable upfront payment of 25 million and it is obligated to pay an additional 1 million at the end of each year throughout the stated term. So a right of access license with non-refundable payments. I repeat, non-refundable payment, a right of access, because right of access is over a period. So immediately you will ask, boss, that is non-refundable. Can I recognize it now? No, it is not. Revenue always presupposes existence of your revenue generating activity. If it is to be recognized over a period of time, it has to be recognized over a period. Very common example which I keep giving is, if somebody can, it used to come in the earlier advertisement. Bonwell chocolate used to come with one advertisement. At the end, he says one thing. It is not just a chocolate that is bought. It is a chocolate that has to be earned by you. In a right of access license, the revenue is not earned by the licensor, even though it is non-refundable. So the upfront payment of 25 million currency units, because it is non-refundable, cannot be recognized immediately. It has to be recognized over a term. Now, what is the term? Fine. He started with 10 years. Is it 10 years to be considered? See the last one. Pharma can cancel the contract for convenience at any point in time. But upon cancellation, it must return the rights to the licensed intellectual property to biotech. Now, whose accounting we are doing? Because we are dealing with revenue, we are doing the revenue from a licensor's point of view. See, one important aspect in some of the cases IFRS 15 bought out is, it shifts the stance from the seller to customer in establishing certain things. So in a right of access license, what IFRS 15 asks the entity is, please see, is there any substantive penalty to the customer when he wants to terminate a contract? Here the substantive penalty for the licensee is, he has to give back the license. So he has to give back the license, but he will not get a penny back out of whatever 25 million he has paid. Boss, what sort of one-sided agreement it is? Fine. Maybe because of the commercial terms that the licensor could get that. In that kind of a scenario, definitely as a customer, why would I cancel the contract? Why would I forego the rights that I have received and still don't get a single penny of what I have made? So commercially, there is no reason for the accounting standard to believe why the customer would cancel the contract for the next 10 years. Because he would not have a commercial reason to not to cancel the contract for next 10 years. The term for recognition of revenue is 10 to start with. How much? Your initial 25, plus if you carefully observe, 1 million has to be paid for the next 10 years. 1 into 10 discounted to present value. Why? There is no contingency that is attached to. Time is never a milestone in accounting point of view. Time is bound to pass on. Whether you like it or not, tomorrow is bound to come. Fine. Somebody has a movie, tomorrow never dies. It's a separate thing. But definitely it comes. Tomorrow becomes today. So 1 million is bound to come to you, or you are bound to receive it if the contract were to continue. So there is no constraint with respect to variable, so-called perceived variable consideration. Frankly speaking, that's not even a variable consideration. That's a fixed consideration which will be received at a later point in time. So discounted to present value, 10 into 1 plus 25 have to be recognized over a period of 10 years. This is the answer to it. Basically, you can go through. Second one. Now, coming to licensing and supply agreements, basically, this is more to do with Alpha, a pharmaceutical company, enters into an agreement with Delta to provide it with a license related to a mature product for a period of 10 years. For the first 3 years, Alpha will continue to manufacture the drug while Delta is developing its manufacturing facilities in order to continue to manufacture the product. Obviously, as I said, a piece of paper which endorses or transfers the license to me does not mean anything to me unless it is complemented by supply of product. That's the fundamental point in pharmaceutical industry. Without getting a product, what should I sell? Right of sale cannot be basically as such can give me any commercial impetus. So since the license is related to a mature product, it is not expected that the underlying product will change over a license period. The manufacturing could be performed by any other contract manufacturing organization. Fine. The question is giving you some of the parameters so that you can very easily answer it. But those parameters are what the requirements of an accounting standard is. All the promises in a contract. Promise is an economic term. Performance obligation is an accounting term. A promise as per economics need not be a performance obligation as per accounting. I'll give you a small example which US GAAP considered when explaining multiple deliverables. If you can relate it to Axe deodorant, when he supplies a product, you know how he supplies, very meticulous way of supplying. When you ask for a million bottles of Axe product, deodorant product to you, first what you get is that nozzle. Only nozzle will come to you. What will you do with that nozzle? Will you be able to sell it? You will not be able to sell it. Or you will not be able to use it also. Then only the bottle comes, not the content of the bottle. So now you have a nozzle, you have a bottle. The content comes in the third shipment. What the accounting standard asks you is, for the first two promises, are these two performance obligations? Is again, stance goes from seller to customer, IFRS 15, both in the case of termination of a contract and at the time of explaining the multiple deliverables, took the stance from a customer's point of view. It did not go to seller's point of view, even though accounting is a revenue accounting. For a customer, when or at what point in time there is a standalone value, with the nozzle, he will not get any standalone value. Okay, can he get the bottle? Can he get the product from somebody else? If I can get from anybody else, why would I raise a contract from only? Why would I raise something only for Axe? What is his so greatness? Obviously, because I believe something is unique with respect to his product, I consider him as the only supplier of the content. So because there is no alternative vendor, this does not feature any standalone value. Step 2. Okay, he supplied me the bottle. Now what should I do? Without content, what will you do? Also, I have previously established that there is no other supplier. And these are all patented bottles and shapes. These are not something which can be easily manufactured by somebody else. So even though I get nozzle and I get bottle, I did not get anything. Third one is, only when the content comes. Probably I can actually sell it off. I can sell all the three pieces together. So from Axe's point of view, the first two promises are not performance obligations. He cannot recognize any revenue. Then what he should do? Any upfront revenue received, even though it is non-refundable, has to be recognized over a period of time. That is what IFRS 15 very clearly asks us. That in case of multiple deliverables, please do identify the unit of accounting. It is a single unit of accounting of supplying deodorant in the 3 shipments. First 2 shipments are only promises as per the contract. They are not performance obligations. How does one define performance obligation? Anything that adds value to customer. It's a customer-centric accounting standard with respect to accounting for right of access licenses and multiple deliverables. Will he be able to get any benefit out of it? In this case, he is basically explaining us all those requirements. Because there is a third-party supplier, because it is a matured brand, there are enough number of suppliers who can replenish the missing component if you don't get any supply for any of the period. So limiting ourselves only to the facts of the example provided, any upfront consideration can be recognized immediately. You need not defer it over the period. What if, on the other hand, it is not a matured product and it has to be specifically manufactured in a ring-fenced property, plant and equipment area that has been approved by a regulator? Then, which is as is the case with any other US-based pharmaceutical company, it's pretty difficult for you to say that there is an alternative vendor possible. Always remember, when it says that alternative availability of a vendor, in 2 years he is available. If you put $15 million, he is available. 2 years and $15 million are not economic reasons for him to say that it is immediately available now. Without any loss of time and without incurring too much amount of cost, these guys should be available. Readily available is what basis for conclusions of IFRS 15 explicitly talks about. If he is readily available, only then it should be cost optimistic and time optimistic. 2 years down the line he is available, 6 months down the line he is available. Because time is money in business. So definitely 6 months down the line he is available means he is not readily available. So please, at any point in time you have encountered these kind of contracts, please do establish or demonstrate these kind of parameters before saying whether revenue can be recognized period of time or over a period of time. As I said, 56, example number 56 of IFRS 15 exclusively talks about distinct performance obligations and non-distinct performance obligations when it comes to revenue. So you can go through. This example is based on that illustration. Yeah, contingent payments. Let me give you another example. Research and Co, a contract research organization, enters into an arrangement with company Pharma, a pharmaceutical company, to perform clinical trial on phase 3 drug candidate. Research company will receive fixed consideration. Now you have to shift the stance. You are no more a buyer of the compound. You are the seller of the compound. So for selling the compound and for continuing the product development, I am getting money. So now you are not the buyer. Buyer is there with respect to IAS 25 and when we talked about funding arrangements, all that. Now you are basically a seller. Along with that, I am also getting some money for the purpose of my continued development activity services provided to the buyer of this compound. Research company has an extensive experience in enrolling the patients. One of the milestones being 2 million he would get after screening 100 patients as part of the development activity. So I have an extensive experience in enrolling the patients. See, this is basically a demonstration by the company. All these, when put under question and answer mode, it's pretty easy because the question will give you what are all the subtle nuances that you need to look up to in a contract. But when somebody has to put it practically, research company has an extensive experience in enrolling patients. How easy it would be? It's not that easy. You need to demonstrate it. How many similar transactions you have done in the past? How much amount of success you have achieved? What is your success rate? And also establish the probability that you have collected the money on time. Because point number 1 of revenue recognition 5-step model incorporates in the last point as probability of collection of money as well. So in case of this, when you have that previous history of establishing development activities seamlessly and smoothly, you will be able to generate, you will be able to establish that not just the fixed consideration which is received upfront of 20, but also 2 million, which you are saying little contingent upon me carrying out the development activity, maybe after 1 year or 1.5 years. Time is regardless here. You will always have to discount. But what accounting standard brings us as a constraint is, please do ensure that it is not reversible at a later point in time. So IFRS 15, when it talks about variable consideration, brings a constraint. You can recognize variable contingent amount as a variable consideration as a part of fixed consideration only and only, and to the extent that it is highly probable that it will not be reversed at a later point in time. Fine, this is one normal example. Very, very close example I will give you, which you can relate to. I have sold a compound. Upfront consideration is $20 million. If the other party launches the product, I will get another $10 million. Now, launching the product is not in my hands. Will he launch it? Should the 10 million be considered as part of my 20? One demonstration is, you need to demonstrate that the other party bought the product for launching it, not for killing it. Not in all circumstances. These are actually called, sorry for giving my reference to US GAAP. In US GAAP, there is a concept called defense intangible assets. Not in all circumstances you buy intangible assets only to promote them. You will buy sometimes some intangible assets to kill them. Very crude example outside of our industry is when Coke bought Thumbs Up, it was initially not to promote Thumbs Up. It was to kill the brand Thumbs Up so that Coke can take the advantage of the platform. So in many circumstances I have seen, in out-licensing arrangements, the other party buys your intangible asset to kill the competition. So if it is a case of killing the competition, you will never get the $10 million because he will never launch that product. Maybe I am taking an exceptional route or exceptional position. If you can refute this position, if you can defy this position, obviously what is advantageous are available to you is if you can demonstrate that other party decided to launch the product and it is not a defense intangible asset. The 10 million, which is a variable consideration, can also come to you on day one as a fixed consideration to be recognized over a period or at a point in time, depending on the unit of accounting. So this is what I just thought of sharing with you with respect to contingent payments. Yeah. Last example, I just pick it up and then I will open the forum for question and answers. Let's read KRB and Devox as C and D. C has appointed D to develop existing compound on its behalf. D will have no further involvement in the compound after the approval. So I have out-licensed it. I will get some money upfront, and I am also part of the development journey for some more point in time. So that guy is basically giving me money for my participation in the development activity. Now see how the payment terms are structured. 3 million upon signing the agreement. Signing the agreement, is it a revenue earning activity? What sort of revenue earning activity you have done, even though it is non-refundable? So pretty much known answer. 3 million has to be recognized over a period of time, because you haven't earned anything. 1 million upon successful completion of phase 3 and 2 million upon securing the regulatory approval. Now see, it is not like the previous example. You can't demonstrate anything with respect to regulator, that whether he will approve it or whether I will definitely get some success in phase 3. So definitely 1 and 2 millions, basically B and C points, are purely contingent considerations which are under variable consideration category, and at least as per the example or given the facts of the case above, with some decent understanding of IAS 38, you can't establish on day one that 1 and 2 are highly probable, because the very fundamental fact that technical feasibility is not established unless it is actually established. So 1 and 3 are outside the scope. So what is that this accounting standard is trying to, or what is this example is trying to explain? 3 million is over a period of time. 1 million is also over a period of time, but not now. When once you achieve it, you will recognize. Over a period of time means, is it from the date of obtaining a phase 3 clinical trial approval to remaining period, or is there any catch-up? The answer is the last line in whatever the next slide is. This could result in a cumulative catch-up of revenue for the performance to date. Meaning 3 million is over a period, 1 million it happens in the middle of the period. Please, it is also over a period. 2 million happens almost at the fag end of your development term. It is also over the period. Let's assume in terms of efforts or in terms of time, easier thing for us to explain. If time based, if it is going to take 24 months, on day one, 3 million to be recognized over a period of 24. 1 million, let's assume that it happened exactly after 12 months. 1 has to be recognized over 24, but 12 has already elapsed. So 0.5 million is an immediate recognition, 0.5 over the remainder of the period. 2 million happened after 20 months. Over 24, so divided by 24 into 20 is your immediate catch-up. That is what this example says at the last second of that slide. This could result in cumulative catch-up of revenue for the performance to the date. So even in a over a period contract, please do keep your points ready with respect to, is there any other alternative way of recognizing revenue? With proper a demonstration of documentation and with economic substance, yeah, you can get some revenue immediate as a catch-up into the books of account. That's it. These are the broad points which I wanted to cover as part of my exposure and experience with respect to pharmaceutical industry over the past 15 years as an auditor and also as part of the management. Yeah. With this, I open up the forum for questions.
Yes, Sudhakarji, there are one or two questions. I will
Okay.
just put it on the screen, and then we can.
Yeah. Should I stop my screen share, sir?
No, I will take it over. Not an issue.
Okay.
It will automatically be taken over. Just let me know once the query is visible on the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's only one by CA Fasil Machingal. In funding by venture capitalists, the amount will be recognized as financial liability. And if the drug development not succeeded, how the liability will turn off, and also how to recognize finance cost of 50% as in the example.
Yeah, it is pretty simple, sir. First, I'll take one by one. There are two components to it. Assuming if the drug development does not go as per the line and there is a clear contractual termination and both the parties now will go, okay, I'll go my side, you go your way. R Ventures, taking that example, R Ventures will go on its own without taking the money. Entire financial liability will be de-recognized as an income in the period in which the termination takes place. Again, IFRS 9, de-recognition of liability is the point to be considered. Either upon payment or contractually the other party has absolved you from making the payment. Looks little surprising and intriguing as well. So I started with 100 crores and I, to an extent, because let's say because the drug development is not positive, more economical way to consider that is this 100 million is there in my books of account at the end. Now both the parties have decided that we will not take it forward. 100 million looks interesting, is an income to you in that period as a income to your profit and loss account. Very clear, that is. Now second one, how should the cost of borrowing be recognized in the books of account? And I said cost of borrowing, it basically takes the form of cost of borrowing. The liability is a FVTPL category based liability. So depending on your drug development or the development, positivity or negativity, whether you are moving closer from 100 to 150 or you are only at 150. So depending on the stage of development and the manner in which the development activity is going on, you might know that this 100 will become 110 or 105 or 120 at a later point in time. So if let's say it is going in a positive direction and after end of 1 year it became 115, this 15 has to be recognized in the books of account. So to give you a very clear answer, very short answer, it is FVTPL categorized asset. So you need to fair value, take the differential of fair value to profit and loss. That's it, sir.
Yeah, in fact, a couple of more questions have come. I'll just put it on the screen again. Just give me a moment. Yeah, one feedback has come. Excellent cases and good coverage by CA Bharat. And next is by CA Venkateshan. Is this applicable for wholesale of pharmacy?
Which one, sir, is this applicable for? I presume that this is funding matter. Yeah, I mean, as a company, as I said, basically the entity, if it were to be under Ind AS accounting, yeah, whichever has to be made applicable as the framework suggests. All industrial, economic, and commercial entities have to apply Ind AS. So I presume that if wholesale as a setup, it is applicable. Or if I am reading it altogether different, so pardon me, you need to little more explain me what exactly does mean that means by wholesale of pharmacy. Yeah.
Yeah, next is by CS Syed Tabriz. Sir, could you give your quick view on funding by government or NGO organizations for product development?
Very clear, sir. IAS 20, paragraph 20 gives you the same reference. If there is a product development funded by government, where the compensation has to be paid by the company back in the form of royalties only upon product development, it is a liability. It is very, very clearly mentioned in IAS 20 itself. In fact, I wanted to cover that point also. I missed it in the presentation.
So thank you, Sudhakarji, for an excellent presentation and very importantly sparing your time on Sunday. And we also thank all the participants who spare their time on this Sunday morning. So I request our Regional Council member and Chairman of the Members in Industry Committee, C. Naresh Chandra Gelli, to propose the vote of thanks and share his thoughts on it as well. Gelli,
Thank
sir,
you,
over
thank
to you.
you. It's my pleasure, sir, in fact, having taken the opportunity.
Gelli, sir, you are not audible, Gelli, sir. Gelli, sir, no, we are not getting your audio.
Still not, sir.
No, sir, no. Can you just remove the plug and plug in again? No, no, Gelli, sir, we are still not. Maybe you can just remove the headphone and try, Gelli, sir. No, I think that is also not working out. So this is the challenges of technology as well. Sometimes when you need it the most, you don't get it.
Maybe next topic should be accounting issues in technology industry.
No, we have live experiences in the meetings that we don't have to keep a separate meeting for that.
Agree.
Okay, Gelli sir, let me do it on your behalf and on behalf of all the participants. Friends, we had an excellent session. Like I was listening all the time, a lot of inputs for me because we generally concentrate more on the conventional areas, be it income tax, GST, or one which are more relevant for practice. But a lot of new thoughts has come, and I'm very sure people who are doing audits for pharmaceuticals will be immensely benefited, as well as people who are joined from the industry. So Sudhakarji, thank you so much, and we are looking forward to sometimes invite you to Chennai and other branches where you could share your knowledge on this.
More than happy, sir. More than happy. Teaching is my passion. In fact, I believe that I could add something. That I am always.
Your presentation and your speech was testimony to what you said, that your teaching is your passion. Only somebody is passionate, this much things can come out. It was very, very fruitful indeed. Thank you so much. And I thank all the participants who have spared their time on Sunday to see that the energy gets back to us, the organizers, as well as the speaker who has prepared so much. Thank you, all of you. See you again at the next meeting.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.